I was sitting at my desk at Premier Marketing Solutions trying to finish quarterly reports before my lunch break when my phone buzzed with a text that would change everything. The message from Dad read, "Sold your laptop. Emma needs a new phone. Be grateful we feed you." My heart stopped. That laptop was my graduation gift from Grandma Rose before she passed away 2 years ago. I typed back frantically asking what he meant. Another text arrived immediately. "Also, you'll pay her tuition, $5,800 by Friday." I couldn't breathe. When I responded, "No chance." His final message was brutal. "Then get out. You're cut off." I stared at my phone screen in complete disbelief, reading Dad's messages over and over again. My 23rd birthday was supposed to be special, but instead, I was being kicked out of my childhood home for refusing to pay my sister's college expenses. The worst part wasn't even the eviction threat. It was losing Grandma Rose's laptop, the only tangible connection I had left to her memory. During my lunch break, I rushed to the nearest ATM to check my savings account balance. My hands trembled as I inserted my debit card, praying I had enough money to find temporary housing somewhere. The screen displayed a balance of $0.37. My stomach dropped through the floor. I called the bank immediately, certain there had been some terrible mistake. The customer service representative explained that someone with authorized access had withdrawn $3,200 that morning, the entire contents of my savings account that I'd been building since high school graduation. "Who has access to my account?" I whispered into the phone, though I already knew the devastating answer. "The account shows your father as co-signer from when you were 17, the representative confirmed. "He has full withdrawal privileges." I hung up and sat in my Honda Civic in the bank parking lot, sobbing uncontrollably. Dad had stolen my money to fund Emma's lifestyle just like he'd been doing for years. While I worked 25 hours a week at a coffee shop during college to pay for textbooks and groceries, Emma received brand new cars, designer handbags, and private tutoring sessions without lifting a finger. When I returned to the office, my coworker Jessica noticed my red, puffy eyes immediately. "Camille, what happened? You look devastated." I broke down in the bathroom, explaining the entire situation between hiccuping sobs. Jessica wrapped her arms around me and offered her couch for a few nights until I could figure out alternative arrangements. Her kindness made me cry even harder, realizing that my coworker showed me more compassion in 5 minutes than my family had in years. That evening, I drove to my childhood home to collect my belongings. Dad stood in the driveway with his arms crossed, watching coldly as I loaded clothes books and personal items into garbage bags. He didn't help carry anything or show even a hint of remorse about throwing his daughter out on her birthday. "This is what happens when you're selfish and ungrateful," he said flatly. "Emma appreciates everything we do for her. You never learned how to say thank you." I wanted to scream that I'd been working and contributing financially since I was 16, while Emma had never held a job in her entire life. Instead, I silently packed my car and drove away from the only home I'd ever known, spending my birthday night in the office parking garage because I was too embarrassed to show up at Jessica's apartment so late. The next morning, my phone rang while I was brushing my teeth in the office bathroom sink. Emma's name flashed on the screen, and for a brief moment I felt hopeful that she was calling to apologize or help resolve the situation with Dad. "Camille, I heard what happened yesterday," Emma said in a syrupy, sweet voice that immediately put me on guard. "I'm really sorry you're going through this." I sank onto the bathroom floor, grateful that someone in my family finally seemed to care about my well-being. "Emma, I can't believe Dad sold Grandma's laptop without asking me. That was the last thing I had from her." "Well, you weren't really using it for anything important," Emma replied casually, "and I desperately needed a new phone because mine keeps crashing during my Instagram live streams." My blood ran cold. "You knew about the laptop sale beforehand." Emma's tone shifted dramatically. "Of course I knew. I suggested it actually. Dad and I discussed how you've been taking advantage of the family for years, living rent-free, while contributing basically nothing to household expenses." Contributing nothing. I stood up, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I've been working part-time jobs since I was 16. I bought my own car, paid for my own gas, and never asked for spending money like you do every single week." "That's completely different," Emma snapped. "I'm still in college, so obviously I need financial support. You're supposedly an adult with a real job now, but you still expect handouts from mom and dad." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Handouts, Emma. You drive a brand new Jeep that Dad bought you last semester. You get $500 a month for clothes and entertainment. I drive a 12-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield that I purchased myself." "Listen, Camille." Emma's voice turned calculating and cruel. "You owe this family for 23 years of food, shelter, clothing, and education. The least you can do is help pay for my tuition when I'm struggling academically." "Struggling academically," I repeated. "Emma, you're failing classes because you party 4 nights a week and skip lectures to go shopping with your sorority sisters." "That's a lie," Emma shouted. "I'm failing because my professors are biased against me and the coursework is unreasonably difficult. Unlike you, I wasn't born with perfect grades and teacher's pet status." I realized with growing horror that Emma genuinely believed her own twisted version of reality. She'd convinced herself that academic success came naturally to me, when the truth was that I studied for hours every night while working multiple jobs to support myself. "Emma, I earned good grades because I worked incredibly hard," I explained patiently. "I spent countless hours in the library while you were out having fun with friends." "Whatever helps you sleep at night," Emma replied dismissively. "The bottom line is that Dad expects you to contribute $5,800 by Friday, or you can forget about having a family anymore." "And what happens if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Emma's voice turned positively venomous. "Then I'll make sure every single person in our extended family knows that you abandoned us when we needed help the most. I'll tell Aunt Patricia and Uncle David that you're jealous of my success and refuse to help pay for my education out of pure spite." I realized that Emma had been recording our entire conversation to gather evidence for her character assassination campaign. She'd called pretending to offer sympathy, but her real goal was manipulating me into saying something that could be taken out of context later. "Emma, I need to go," I said quietly. "Think carefully about your decision," Emma warned before hanging up, "because once you burn bridges with this family, there's no coming back." I sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes trying to process the fact that my sister had orchestrated my financial destruction and homelessness. Emma wasn't just complicit in Dad's favoritism, she was actively encouraging and benefiting from it. Around 10:30 that morning, my boss Margaret Sullivan knocked on my cubicle wall with a concerned expression on her face. Margaret was in her late 50s with silver-streaked auburn hair and kind blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd always been supportive and fair, but we'd never discussed personal matters before. "Camille, could I speak with you privately in my office?" she asked gently. "I couldn't help but overhear your phone conversation earlier, and I'm worried about you." My cheeks flushed with embarrassment as I followed her down the hallway. The last thing I wanted was for my professional reputation to suffer because of my family drama, but Margaret's tone suggested genuine concern rather than judgment. "I'm sorry if my personal situation is affecting my work performance," I began as she closed the office door behind us. "Your work performance has been excellent," Margaret interrupted, gesturing for me to sit in the comfortable chair across from her mahogany desk. "I'm concerned about you as a person, not as an employee." She poured 2 cups of coffee from the machine in the corner and handed me one with a warm smile. "Camille, I knew your mother professionally before she passed away. We served together on the board of directors for New Beginnings, a non-profit organization that helps single mothers achieve financial independence." My hands trembled slightly as I held the coffee cup. Nobody had mentioned Mom's volunteer work in years, and hearing about her life outside our family brought tears to my eyes. "Your mother spoke about you constantly during our board meetings," Margaret continued. "She was incredibly proud of your academic achievements and work ethic. She also expressed concerns about certain family dynamics that might affect your future." "What kind of concerns?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Margaret opened her desk drawer and retrieved a manila folder with my mother's handwriting on the tab. 3 months before your mother passed away, she came to my office asking for legal referrals. She wanted to establish protections for you in case certain family members tried to take advantage of your financial situation after her death. My heart began racing. What kind of protections? Your mother set up an education trust fund specifically for your graduate school expenses, Margaret explained, sliding official documents across the desk. She worked with attorney Samuel Richardson downtown to ensure the fund could only be accessed by you and that it would be protected from any family members who might try to interfere with your financial independence. I stared at the paperwork in complete shock. The trust fund contained $47,000 more money than I'd ever imagined having access to. Mom had somehow predicted that Dad's favoritism toward Emma would escalate after her death, and she'd taken legal steps to protect me. "There's more," Margaret said softly. "Your mother asked me to serve as an emergency contact in case you ever needed help dealing with family financial abuse. She suspected that your father might try to control or steal your money once you graduated from college. She knew," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "She knew that Dad would treat me like this." Margaret nodded sadly. "Your mother was very perceptive about people's motivations and behaviors. She loved your father deeply, but she recognized his tendency to favor Emma and take advantage of your generous nature. I couldn't believe that Mom had been protecting me even after her death. She'd seen through Dad's manipulation and Emma's entitlement, creating a safety net for exactly the situation I was facing now. "What do I need to do to access the trust fund?" I asked, wiping my eyes with the tissue Margaret offered. "I'll call Samuel Richardson this afternoon to schedule an appointment," Margaret replied. "In the meantime, you're welcome to stay in my guest room for as long as necessary. I have a comfortable space above my garage with a private entrance, and I could use the company since my daughter moved to Portland last year." Margaret's kindness overwhelmed me completely. After 24 hours of feeling completely alone and abandoned, I discovered that Mom had arranged for both financial protection and emotional support through the most unexpected source. "Why are you helping me?" I asked through fresh tears. "You barely know me outside of work." Margaret smiled warmly. "Your mother asked me to look out for you if anything ever happened to her. She said you were the strongest person she knew, but that you'd been conditioned to put everyone else's needs before your own. She wanted to make sure you had allies who could remind you of your worth when your family tried to tear you down." I realized that Mom had seen the toxic dynamics in our household more clearly than anyone, and she'd spent her final months creating a support system to help me escape. Her love and protection extended far beyond the grave, giving me hope for the first time since receiving Dad's devastating text message. The next afternoon, Margaret drove me to Samuel Richardson's law office in downtown Springfield. The building was an elegant Victorian house converted into professional offices, with polished hardwood floors and antique furniture that gave it a warm, welcoming atmosphere. Samuel Richardson was a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, with graying temples and a genuine smile. He greeted me with both hands, as if I were a long-lost family member rather than a new client. "Camille, I've been waiting to meet you for almost 3 years," he said, leading us into his wood-paneled office. "Your mother spoke about you with such pride and affection during our meetings." He gestured for me to sit in a leather chair across from his antique oak desk, then retrieved a thick file folder with my name written on the front in Mom's familiar handwriting. "Your mother was one of the most thoughtful and strategic people I've ever worked with." Samuel began opening the folder to reveal dozens of legal documents. She came to me 8 months before her cancer diagnosis, expressing concerns about how her family would treat you after her passing. She knew she was going to get sick. I asked, confused about the timeline. Samuel shook his head. She didn't know about the cancer yet, but she'd observed troubling patterns in your household that made her want to protect your financial future. Your mother was particularly worried about your father's tendency to prioritize Emma's immediate desires over your long-term well-being. He spread several documents across the desk, pointing to various sections highlighted in yellow. The Education Trust Fund contains $47,000, as Margaret mentioned. However, that's only the beginning of what your mother arranged for you. Samuel opened a second folder containing property deeds and financial statements. Your mother also left you sole ownership of the family vacation house in Lake George. The property is worth approximately $210,000, and it generates substantial rental income during peak season. My mouth fell open in complete shock. The Lake George house. But Dad told everyone that he inherited it when Mom died. Samuel's expression grew stern. Your father has been illegally collecting rental income from property that never belonged to him. According to these documents, your mother purchased the Lake George house with her inheritance from her parents in 1998, 2 years before she married your father. He showed me copies of the original deed clearly listing Mom as the sole owner. Your mother specifically excluded this property from any joint marital assets to ensure it would pass directly to you upon her death. I felt dizzy trying to process all this information. How much rental income has Dad been collecting? Samuel consulted his files and pulled out detailed financial records. Based on rental rates for comparable Lake George properties, your father has likely collected between $23,000 and $28,000 annually for the past 3 years. He owes you approximately $75,000 in stolen rental income. The numbers were staggering. Dad hadn't just taken my savings account. He'd been stealing tens of thousands of dollars that legally belonged to me since Mom's death. There's something else. Samuel continued producing a sealed letter with my name written in Mom's handwriting. Your mother left specific instructions for me to give you this letter when you were ready to learn the full truth about your family's financial situation. I opened the envelope with trembling hands and began reading Mom's letter silently. My dearest Camille, if you're reading this letter, it means that your father's favoritism toward Emma has escalated to the point where you needed legal protection. I'm sorry I couldn't shield you from this pain while I was alive, but I hope these financial resources will give you the independence and security you deserve. Your father is a good man in many ways, but his relationship with Emma brings out his worst impulses. He's terrified of losing her love, so he tries to buy her affection with money and gifts. Unfortunately, this means he sees you as a resource to be exploited rather than a daughter to be cherished. Emma has been conditioned to expect endless financial support without contributing anything in return. Your father enabled this behavior because her dependence makes him feel important and needed. However, Emma's entitlement will eventually destroy both of their lives if it continues unchecked. You, my darling daughter, have always been strong and independent. Sometimes I worry that we took advantage of your resilience, expecting you to handle adult responsibilities while still a teenager. You deserve the same unconditional support and protection that we gave Emma. These legal arrangements will ensure that you can build a life based on your own choices rather than your family's demands. Use this money to pursue your dreams, whether that means graduate school, starting a business, or simply having the security to walk away from toxic relationships. Remember that you are worthy of love and respect exactly as you are. You don't need to earn affection by sacrificing your well-being for other people's comfort. I'm proud of the woman you've become, and I know you'll use these resources wisely. All my love, Mom. I sobbed uncontrollably as I finished reading, overwhelmed by Mom's wisdom and love. She'd understood the family dynamics better than anyone, and she'd created a path for my escape from years of financial manipulation. Samuel handed me another tissue and waited patiently for me to compose myself. Your mother also included specific instructions about legal recourse if your father or sister attempted to interfere with your inheritance. He showed me documentation proving that Dad had been forging my signature on bank documents and misrepresenting my consent to various financial decisions. Mom had anticipated these exact scenarios and gathered evidence to protect me from further abuse. What are my options? I asked, wiping my eyes and trying to focus on practical next steps. We can file immediate legal claims to recover the stolen rental income and establish your rightful ownership of the Lake George property," Samuel explained. "We can also pursue criminal charges against your father for financial abuse and fraud, depending on how aggressive you want to be." For the first time in days, I felt powerful instead of helpless. Mom had given me the tools to fight back against years of exploitation and favoritism. I wasn't Dad's victim anymore. I was a property owner with significant financial resources and legal protection. "I want to pursue every available legal option," I said firmly. "My father stole my money to fund Emma's lifestyle, and he's been lying about the inheritance for 3 years. It's time for him to face consequences for his actions." Samuel smiled approvingly. "Your mother predicted you'd say exactly that. She always believed you had the strength to stand up for yourself once you realized your true worth." By Thursday evening, Dad realized something was seriously wrong. I hadn't responded to any of his increasingly frantic text messages, and when he drove by my old apartment complex, the landlord informed him that I'd moved out without leaving a forwarding address. Dad started calling Premier Marketing Solutions every few hours, demanding to speak with me. Our receptionist, Linda, finally transferred one of his calls to Margaret's office around 3 in the afternoon. "This is Margaret Sullivan, Camille's supervisor. How can I help you?" "I need to speak with my daughter immediately." Dad's voice was sharp and agitated. "She's been ignoring my calls for 2 days, and we have important family business to discuss." Margaret's tone remained professionally cool. "Camille is currently in meetings, but I can take a message if you'd like." "Meetings?" Dad scoffed. "What kind of meetings? She's a junior marketing coordinator, not some high-powered executive. Tell her that her family emergency takes priority over whatever busy work she's doing." "I'll pass along your message," Margaret replied diplomatically before hanging up. 20 minutes later, Dad called back again. This time Linda transferred him directly to my voicemail, but he immediately called the main line and demanded to speak with a manager about his irresponsible employee daughter. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stop calling our office," Linda said firmly. "If you continue to harass our staff, I'll have to contact building security." Dad's panic intensified when he realized I'd completely disappeared from his sphere of control. He drove to Jessica's apartment complex that evening, walking through the parking lot looking for my Honda Civic. When he couldn't find my car, he started knocking on random doors asking if anyone knew where Camille Martinez was staying. A neighbor called the police about a suspicious man wandering through the complex after dark, and Officer Bradley responded to investigate the disturbance. "What's your relationship to the person you're looking for?" Officer Bradley asked, shining his flashlight on Dad's agitated face. "She's my daughter," Dad explained breathlessly. "We had a family disagreement and now she won't return my phone calls. I'm worried about her safety." "Has your daughter indicated that she wants contact with you?" Officer Bradley continued his questioning. Dad hesitated, realizing that admitting I was deliberately avoiding him might lead to more complicated questions. "She's just being stubborn and emotional. Young women sometimes overreact to family conflicts." Officer Bradley's expression grew more serious. "Sir, if your adult daughter is choosing not to communicate with you, that's her legal right. I'm going to need you to leave this property immediately." "But you don't understand," Dad protested. "She owes money to the family and tomorrow is the deadline for payment. If she doesn't contribute to her sister's tuition, Emma could lose her spot at college." "That sounds like a civil matter," Officer Bradley replied. "You'll need to handle financial disputes through proper legal channels, not by tracking down your daughter at random apartment complexes." Dad returned home that night feeling desperate and confused. He'd expected me to come crawling back within 24 hours, begging for forgiveness and agreeing to pay Emma's expenses. Instead, I'd vanished completely, leaving him with no way to access the money he'd been counting on. Emma was growing increasingly anxious about her tuition deadline, calling Dad every few hours to ask about my whereabouts. "Did you find Camille yet?" Emma demanded over the phone. "The bursar's office called again today about my outstanding balance." "I'm working on it." Dad lied, pacing around the kitchen. She's just playing games to get attention. She'll come around when she realizes we're serious about cutting her off. What if she doesn't? Emma's voice pitched higher with worry. Dad, I can't afford to lose my enrollment. All my friends would find out that I got kicked out for not paying tuition. Dad rubbed his temples, feeling a migraine building behind his eyes. Emma, honey, everything will work out fine. Camille has always been responsible about family obligations. But privately, Dad was beginning to understand that his control over me had completely evaporated. For the first time in years, he couldn't manipulate or pressure me into compliance with his financial demands. Friday morning arrived without any communication from me. Dad spent the entire day calling everyone who might know my location, including my former co-workers from the coffee shop, my college friends, and even my high school guidance counselor. Finally, around 4 p.m, building security at Premier Marketing Solutions called to inform him that they had video footage of him following employees to their cars in the parking garage. "Sir, we're going to need you to stay away from this building," the security chief warned. "Your daughter's supervisor has requested a no-contact directive, and we're prepared to file trespassing charges if necessary." That's when Dad realized I wasn't coming back on my own. He'd have to take more aggressive action to force a confrontation and regain control over the situation. He spent Friday evening researching my recent credit card purchases, trying to figure out where I might be staying. When he discovered a transaction at a coffee shop near Margaret's neighborhood, he decided to drive through the area looking for my car. Saturday morning, Dad spotted my Honda Civic parked in Margaret's driveway. He sat in his truck across the street for 2 hours, working up the courage to approach the house and demand to speak with me. At 11:30 Saturday morning, Dad finally gathered enough nerve to march up Margaret's front walkway and ring the doorbell repeatedly. I was in the kitchen helping Margaret prepare lunch when we heard the aggressive knocking. "Camille, I know you're in there," Dad shouted from the front porch. "We need to talk right now." Margaret peered through the front window and immediately reached for her cell phone. "Should I call the police?" I took a deep breath, realizing that avoiding Dad forever wasn't a realistic long-term strategy. "No, let me handle this. But would you mind staying close by in case things get out of hand?" Margaret nodded and pressed the record button on her phone as I opened the front door. Dad looked terrible. His hair was uncombed, his clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot from stress and lack of sleep. "There you are," Dad exclaimed, pushing past me into Margaret's entryway. "Do you have any idea how worried I've been? You disappeared without telling anyone where you were going." "I told you exactly where I was going," I replied calmly. "You kicked me out of the house, so I found somewhere else to live." Dad looked around Margaret's elegant living room with obvious discomfort. "Who is this woman, and why are you staying with strangers instead of working things out with your family?" "Margaret is my supervisor, and she's been kind enough to offer me temporary housing while I figure out permanent arrangements," I explained. Margaret stepped forward with professional authority. "Mr. Martinez, I'm going to need you to lower your voice. You're a guest in my home, and I expect you to behave respectfully." Dad ignored Margaret, completely focusing all his attention on me. "Camille, this little tantrum has gone on long enough. Emma's tuition payment was due yesterday, and the college is threatening to drop her from all her classes." "That sounds like Emma's problem," I replied evenly. "Maybe she should get a part-time job to help pay her expenses." "A job." Dad's voice rose to a near shout. "Emma is a full-time student. She doesn't have time to work because she's focused on her education." I worked 25 hours a week throughout college and still graduated summa cum laude, I pointed out. Emma could absolutely manage a part-time job if she prioritized her time better. Dad's face flushed red with anger. "You've always been jealous of Emma's success and popularity. Just because you had to struggle doesn't mean she should suffer the same hardships." "Struggle," I repeated incredulously. "Dad, you stole $3,200 from my savings account without permission. You sold my grandmother's laptop without asking. You've been treating me like a personal ATM for years while giving Emma everything she wants." "I haven't stolen anything," Dad protested. "That money went toward family expenses and household bills. You're not contributing enough to cover the cost of raising you." Margaret continued recording as Dad's justifications became increasingly desperate and contradictory. "Cost of raising me." I laughed bitterly. "Dad, I moved out 2 years ago. I pay my own rent, buy my own groceries, and handle my own expenses. What exactly am I costing you?" Dad began pacing around Margaret's living room like a caged animal. "You don't understand how expensive everything has become. The mortgage payments, Emma's car insurance, her sorority dues, her meal plan at college. We're drowning in expenses, and you're the only one with a steady income who can help." "What about your income?" I asked. "You've been working at the same company for 15 years. Dad stopped pacing and looked away uncomfortably. "There have been some changes at work, budget cuts and restructuring. My position has been modified." Modified how I pressed. "I was laid off 6 months ago," Dad admitted quietly. "But I've been interviewing for new positions and something will come through soon." My blood ran cold. "6 months ago, Dad, how have you been paying bills for 6 months without income?" "I had some savings set aside," Dad mumbled, "and I've been collecting rental income from the Lake George house to cover expenses." "The Lake George house that legally belongs to me?" I asked sharply. Dad's eyes widened in shock. "What are you talking about? Your mother and I inherited that house together when we got married. Actually, Mom purchased that property with her own inheritance money before you were married," I explained. "She left it to me specifically in her will." Dad's face went pale. "That's impossible. I've been managing that property for 3 years. The rental income has been keeping our family afloat." "The rental income that you've been stealing from me," I clarified. "Samuel Richardson has all the legal documentation proving my ownership." Dad sank onto Margaret's couch, looking genuinely devastated. "Samuel Richardson. Why are you talking to lawyers behind my back?" "Because you've been committing financial fraud against me for years," I replied firmly. "You've stolen my inheritance, emptied my savings account, and lied about property ownership. Mom knew this would happen, so she arranged legal protection for me." "Your mother knew," Dad whispered, his voice breaking. "She planned this." "She planned to protect me from your favoritism and financial abuse," I confirmed. "She saw exactly how you were treating me compared to Emma, and she made sure I'd have resources to escape when it got worse." Dad buried his face in his hands, finally understanding the scope of his actions and their consequences. For the first time in my life, I watched my father confront the reality of his choices without being able to blame me for the results. Just as Dad was processing the devastating news about the inheritance and legal consequences, Emma's car pulled into Margaret's driveway. She'd been calling Dad frantically all morning about her tuition crisis and had tracked his location through his phone's GPS. Emma marched up to the front door wearing a designer jacket and carrying a $2,000 handbag, looking every inch the entitled princess she'd become over the years. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Emma demanded, pushing past Margaret into the living room. "I've been calling you for hours about the college deadline." She stopped short when she saw Dad hunched over on the couch with his head in his hands, looking completely defeated. "What's wrong with him?" Emma asked me suspiciously. "And why are you staying with some random woman instead of coming home where you belong?" "Emma, sit down," I said gently. "There are some things about our family finances that you need to understand." Emma remained standing, crossing her arms defensively. "What kind of things? And why does Dad look like someone died?" "Dad lost his job 6 months ago," I began. "He's been hiding the unemployment from both of us and using other people's money to maintain your lifestyle." Emma's face scrunched in confusion. "Other people's money? What does that mean?" "It means that Dad has been stealing money that legally belongs to me," I explained. "The Lake George house that generates rental income was never his property. Mom left it to me in her will." "That's ridiculous," Emma scoffed. "Dad inherited the Lake George house when Mom died. We've been using the rental money for family expenses." "No, Emma," I said firmly. "Dad has been lying to both of us. Mom specifically left me that property to protect me from financial abuse." Emma looked back and forth between Dad and me, slowly realizing that something was seriously wrong with the story she'd been told. "Dad," Emma's voice became smaller and more uncertain. "Is this true? Did you really lose your job?" Dad finally looked up with tears in his eyes. "Emma, sweetheart, I've been trying to protect you from worrying about money. I thought I'd find another position quickly and you'd never have to know about the unemployment." Emma sank into the chair across from Dad, looking stunned. 6 months, Dad? How have we been paying for everything if you haven't been working?" "I've been using Camille's inheritance money," Dad admitted quietly. "The rental income from the Lake George house plus her savings account that I had access to as co-signer." "You stole from Camille?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I borrowed from family resources to keep us afloat during a temporary crisis," Dad corrected weakly. "I was planning to pay everything back once I found new employment." Emma turned to look at me with growing horror. "Camille, how much money are we talking about?" "Approximately $75,000 in stolen rental income, plus the $3,200 from my savings account," I replied. "And that doesn't include the value of Grandma's laptop that Dad sold without permission." Emma's face went completely white. $75,000, Dad? Where did you think that kind of money was coming from?" "I thought it was marital property from when your mother and I were married," Dad explained lamely. Emma stood up and began pacing just as Dad had done earlier. "So my car payments, my sorority dues, my meal plan, my shopping allowances, all of that was paid for with money you stole from Camille." Dad nodded miserably, unable to meet either of our eyes. Emma turned to me with tears streaming down her face. "Camille, I had no idea. I swear I didn't know that Dad was stealing from you to pay for my expenses." "I know you didn't know," I said softly. "Dad has been lying to both of us about our family's financial situation." Emma collapsed back into the chair, covering her face with her hands. "Oh my God, I've been living off stolen money for months. No wonder you were angry about paying my tuition. You were already paying for everything else without even knowing it." For the first time in years, I saw genuine remorse and understanding in Emma's behavior. She was finally beginning to comprehend the scope of Dad's manipulation and favoritism. "Emma," I said gently, "Dad has been training you to expect financial support without question while teaching me that I'm responsible for everyone else's expenses. Neither of those dynamics was healthy or fair." Emma looked up at me with swollen red eyes. "I've been such a terrible sister. I called you selfish and ungrateful when you were actually the one supporting the family financially." "You didn't know," I repeated. "Dad created this situation by lying to both of us about where money was coming from and where it was going." Emma turned to Dad with an expression of betrayal and disappointment. "How could you do this to us? How could you steal from one daughter to spoil the other?" Dad had no answer. For the first time in his life, he was forced to confront the destructive impact of his favoritism without being able to rationalize or justify his actions. That afternoon, Dad made a desperate phone call to his older brother, David, who lived about an hour away with his wife, Patricia. Dad explained that I was holding the family hostage by refusing to help with Emma's college expenses, and he needed Uncle David's help to talk sense into me. Uncle David and Aunt Patricia arrived around 4 o'clock, expecting to find me being stubborn and unreasonable about normal family financial obligations. Instead, they walked into Margaret's living room to find Dad crying on the couch, while Emma sat in stunned silence. "What on earth is going on here?" Aunt Patricia asked, looking around the room in confusion. "Robert, you said Camille was causing problems for the family." "She is," Dad protested weakly. "She won't help pay Emma's tuition, and now she's threatening legal action over some property dispute." Uncle David sat down across from Dad with a serious expression. "Robert, slow down and explain the situation clearly. What property dispute?" Over the next hour, the entire story came tumbling out. Dad admitted to losing his job, stealing rental income from the Lake George house, emptying my savings account, and selling Grandma's laptop without permission. He tried to justify each action as necessary for family survival, but his explanations sounded increasingly pathetic and self-serving. Aunt Patricia's face grew more and more shocked as she learned about the scope of Dad's financial abuse. "Robert, you stole $75,000 from your own daughter. How could you possibly think that was acceptable?" "I was desperate," Dad exclaimed. "Emma's education is important, and Camille was just letting money sit in accounts without using it productively." "Money that didn't belong to you," Uncle David pointed out sharply. "Robert, what you're describing is theft and financial fraud." Emma spoke up from her corner chair, her voice small and ashamed. "Uncle David, I didn't know any of this was happening. I thought Dad was paying for my expenses with his regular salary." "Of course you didn't know, sweetheart," Aunt Patricia said gently. "Your father was lying to everyone to cover up his crimes." Uncle David turned to me with an apologetic expression. "Camille, I owe you an apology. Your father called us claiming that you were being selfish and unreasonable, but clearly he's been manipulating the truth about everything." "Actually," I said slowly, "there's something else you should probably know. Over the past several years, have you or other family members ever sent money to help with my college expenses or other costs?" Uncle David and Aunt Patricia exchanged meaningful glances. "Yes, we've sent several $1,000s over the years, specifically earmarked for your education and living expenses," Uncle David confirmed. "Why do you ask?" Dad's face turned red and he looked down at his hands without answering. "Dad," I asked pointedly, "where did that money go?" "It went toward household expenses and family costs," Dad mumbled. Aunt Patricia's voice rose dangerously. "Robert, are you telling us that you diverted money we specifically sent for Camille's benefit?" "Everything goes into the same household budget," Dad said defensively. "I can't track every individual dollar." "You absolutely can track individual dollars," Uncle David snapped, "especially when family members are sending money for specific purposes." Emma looked horrified. "Dad, how much money did our relatives send for Camille that actually went to paying for my stuff instead?" "I don't have exact figures," Dad said weakly. Uncle David stood up and began pacing angrily. "Robert, this is financial fraud on multiple levels. You've stolen from Camille, you've misappropriated money from family members, and you've been lying to everyone about your employment status." Aunt Patricia pulled out her cell phone. "I'm calling the rest of the family. Everyone needs to know what's been happening here." "Patricia, please," Dad begged. "Don't involve more people in our private family business." "Private family business," Uncle David repeated incredulously. "Robert, you made this everyone's business when you started stealing money that was intended for your daughter's welfare." Within 2 hours, Margaret's living room was filled with extended family members who had driven from all over the county to understand what was happening. Grandma Rose's sister, Agnes, who was 82 years old, was particularly upset when she learned about the laptop sale. "Robert Martinez, how dare you sell Rose's final gift to Camille without asking permission?" Agnes demanded, shaking her cane at Dad. That laptop was specifically chosen because it had Rose's favorite photos and documents saved on it. Dad looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't know there were personal files on the laptop. I thought it was just a regular computer." "You didn't bother to check before selling it," Agnes continued furiously. "That laptop contained 3 years of letters that Rose wrote to Camille while she was sick. Letters that Camille was supposed to receive on important life milestones." I started crying again, realizing that Dad hadn't just stolen a piece of technology. He destroyed irreplaceable memories and messages from my deceased grandmother. The extended family spent the next hour comparing notes about money they'd sent over the years, discovering that Dad had been systematically lying about Camille's needs while redirecting funds to support Emma's lifestyle. Finally, Uncle David called for a formal family meeting to address the crisis. "Robert, this family cannot continue supporting you financially when you're stealing money and lying to everyone involved." "What does that mean?" Dad asked fearfully. "It means that all financial support from family members is immediately suspended until you seek professional counseling for your behavior and make full restitution to Camille," Uncle David announced. "Additionally, we expect you to cooperate fully with any legal proceedings that Camille chooses to pursue." Emma raised her hand tentatively. "What about my college expenses? I know I don't deserve help after everything that's happened, but I really want to finish my education." Aunt Patricia smiled warmly at Emma. "Sweetheart, we can discuss creating a payment plan for your tuition that doesn't involve stealing from your sister, but it will require you to get a part-time job and contribute to your own expenses going forward." "I would absolutely get a job," Emma said eagerly. "I want to earn my own money instead of living off stolen funds." For the first time all day, I felt hopeful about my family's future. Dad's lies and manipulation had finally been exposed, and everyone was committed to creating healthier financial boundaries going forward. Monday morning, Samuel Richardson filed official paperwork with the county courthouse to establish my legal ownership of the Lake George property and demand immediate restitution for stolen rental income. He also contacted the local police department to report Dad's financial crimes. Detective Martinez, no relation despite sharing my last name, was assigned to investigate the case. She was a woman in her 40s with short black hair and a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put me at ease. Ms. Martinez's financial abuse cases can be complex to prosecute, Detective Martinez explained during our meeting at the police station. However, your attorney has provided extensive documentation that clearly establishes a pattern of theft and fraud. She spread Dad's bank records across the conference table, showing highlighted transactions that proved his systematic theft from my inheritance. Your father has been depositing rental income from your property into his personal account for 3 years. That's approximately $77,000 in documented theft. Samuel leaned forward in his chair. "Detective, there's also evidence of forgery on several bank documents where Mr. Martinez signed Camille's name without authorization." Detective Martinez nodded grimly. "Forgery combined with financial abuse typically constitutes felony charges. If convicted, your father could face up to 5 years in prison and substantial fines." My stomach twisted with conflicted emotions. I wanted Dad to face consequences for his actions, but the idea of him going to prison felt overwhelming and frightening. "Is there any way to resolve this without criminal charges?" I asked tentatively. "That depends on several factors," Detective Martinez replied. "If your father agrees to make full restitution and seeks counseling for his behavior, the prosecutor might be willing to consider reduced charges or alternative sentencing options." Samuel pulled out another folder containing additional evidence. "Detective, there's another complication. Camille's father was recently terminated from his employment at Morrison Industries for suspected embezzlement." Detective Martinez's eyebrows rose sharply. "Embezzlement? That's a separate criminal matter." "Yes," Samuel confirmed. Morrison Industries discovered that approximately $42,000 was missing from petty cash and employee expense accounts over the past 6 months. The timing coincides exactly with Mr. Martinez's unemployment period. I felt sick to my stomach. "You mean Dad was stealing from his job to pay for Emma's expenses?" "That's what the evidence suggests," Samuel replied gently. "Morrison Industries chose not to press charges initially, but they may reconsider given these new developments." Detective Martinez closed the case folder and looked directly at me. "Ms. Martinez, I need you to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with here. Your father has potentially committed multiple felonies across several jurisdictions." She counted off the charges on her fingers. "Financial abuse and theft of inheritance funds, forgery of banking documents, embezzlement from his employer, and fraud related to property rental income. If all these charges proceed to trial, your father could face decades in prison." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. Dad hadn't just made some bad financial decisions. He'd been committing serious crimes for months to maintain Emma's lifestyle while hiding his unemployment. "What happens next?" I asked quietly. "We'll issue a warrant for your father's arrest on the financial abuse charges," Detective Martinez explained. "He'll be brought in for questioning and we'll present him with the evidence we've gathered." "Will he be able to post bail?" I asked. "Given the amount of money involved and the potential flight risk, bail will likely be substantial," Detective Martinez replied. However, if your father is willing to cooperate with the investigation and begin making restitution immediately, the judge might be more lenient. Samuel gathered his paperwork and stood to leave. Camille, I recommend that you prepare yourself emotionally for a lengthy legal process. Financial crime cases often take months to resolve, especially when multiple institutions are involved. As we walked out of the police station, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. For years, I'd been conditioned to believe that I was selfish and ungrateful for questioning Dad's financial decisions. Now I had official confirmation that his behavior constituted serious criminal activity. That afternoon, Detective Martinez called to inform me that Dad had been arrested at home and was being held pending a bail hearing. Emma had been present during the arrest and was reportedly in shock about the additional embezzlement charges. "Your sister called asking if she could visit you," Detective Martinez mentioned. "She seems genuinely remorseful about her role in the family dynamics." "I'd be willing to talk with Emma," I replied. "She's been manipulated by Dad just as much as I have in different ways." "That's very mature of you," Detective Martinez said. "Family financial abuse often creates complicated dynamics where everyone is both victim and participant." That evening, Emma came to Margaret's house looking exhausted and scared. She'd been crying for hours since Dad's arrest, finally understanding the full consequences of his actions. "Camille, I'm so sorry," Emma sobbed as soon as I opened the door. "I had no idea that Dad was committing actual crimes to pay for my lifestyle." "I know you didn't," I said, hugging her tightly. "Emma, we're both victims of Dad's manipulation. The important thing now is figuring out how to move forward honestly." Emma pulled away and looked at me seriously. "I want to get a job immediately and start paying you back for all the stolen money. I know it will take years, but I need to make this right somehow." For the first time since receiving Dad's devastating birthday text, I felt hopeful about my relationship with my sister. Dad's arrest had forced all of us to confront the truth about our family dynamics, creating an opportunity for genuine healing and change. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of quietly accepting a private settlement, I called Samuel Richardson and asked him to pursue the most aggressive legal strategy possible. "I want to file a comprehensive civil lawsuit against my father for financial abuse, theft, and emotional distress," I told Samuel over the phone. "I also want to ensure that other young adults can recognize and escape similar situations." Samuel was quiet for a moment before responding. "Camille, that's a significant decision. Civil litigation will make this entire situation public record, and it could take years to resolve." "I understand the implications," I replied firmly. "But if I stay quiet about Dad's crimes, he'll never truly face consequences for what he's done. And other families might be dealing with similar financial abuse without realizing they have legal options." That afternoon, Samuel filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit seeking full restitution of the $77,000 in stolen rental income, plus additional damages for emotional distress loss of property use and legal expenses. The total amount requested was $135,000. "We're also requesting that the court order your father to undergo mandatory financial counseling and anger management therapy," Samuel explained as we reviewed the paperwork. "The goal is rehabilitation, not just punishment." Using money from Mom's trust fund, I hired additional legal representation to ensure that every aspect of Dad's financial abuse was properly documented and prosecuted. The legal team discovered even more evidence of Dad's systematic theft, including credit cards opened in my name without permission and fraudulent tax filings claiming me as a dependent while I was living independently. Margaret suggested that I contact her friend Jessica Walsh, an investigative journalist who specialized in family financial abuse cases. Jessica was particularly interested in stories that could help educate the public about recognizing and preventing financial manipulation within families. "Camille, your story highlights several warning signs that many young adults don't recognize," Jessica explained during our interview at a downtown coffee shop. "Financial abusers often use guilt, family loyalty, and emotional manipulation to justify their theft. Jessica asked if she could write an article about my experience for the Springfield Herald, focusing on the educational aspects rather than sensationalizing the family drama. I agreed, hoping that sharing my story might help other people in similar situations. What would you want readers to understand about financial abuse within families? Jessica asked, taking notes on her laptop. I want them to know that family members can commit serious crimes against each other, and that being related to someone doesn't give them permission to steal your money or control your financial future. I replied, I also want people to understand that it's not selfish or ungrateful to protect yourself from family members who are exploiting you. The article was published 3 days later with the headline, Local Woman Exposes Years of Family Financial Abuse. The story included expert commentary from financial counselors and legal advocates about recognizing warning signs of family financial manipulation. Within hours of publication, my phone started ringing with calls from other young adults who recognized similar patterns in their own families. A woman named Sarah called to tell me that her parents had been stealing money from her college fund to pay for her brother's drug rehabilitation expenses. Another caller, Marcus, explained that his mother had been forging his signature on loan documents to pay for his sister's wedding expenses. Thank you for speaking out, Sarah said through tears. I thought I was crazy for feeling angry about my parents taking my college money. Reading your story helped me realize that what they're doing is actually illegal. Margaret suggested that I start a blog to provide ongoing support and information for people dealing with family financial abuse. Using my marketing skills from work, I created a website called Family Financial Freedom that offered resources, legal information, and personal stories from survivors of financial abuse. The blog gained traction quickly, with hundreds of visitors sharing their own experiences in the comments section. I partnered with legal advocates and financial counselors to provide accurate information about options for people in abusive family situations. I never expected my personal crisis to become a platform for helping others, I told Margaret one evening as we reviewed blog statistics. But it feels good to turn something so painful into something potentially helpful. Your mother would be incredibly proud, Margaret replied with a warm smile. She always believed that your strength and resilience could make a positive impact on other people's lives. 2 weeks after the article was published, I received a call from Amanda Rodriguez, a producer at Channel 8 News, who wanted to feature my story on their evening program about financial crimes affecting young adults. Camille, we've been getting calls from viewers who want to learn more about protecting themselves from family financial abuse, Amanda explained. Would you be willing to participate in a panel discussion with legal experts and financial counselors? I agreed to appear on the television program despite feeling nervous about sharing my story with such a large audience. The segment aired on a Thursday evening and generated an overwhelming response from viewers who called the station asking for additional resources and support. Within a month, I was receiving speaking invitations from colleges and community organizations who wanted to educate young adults about financial abuse prevention. The speaking fees provided additional income that I used to expand the blog and create more comprehensive resources for survivors. For the first time in my life, I felt truly empowered and purposeful. Dad's financial abuse had been devastating, but transforming that painful experience into something that could help other people gave me a sense of meaning and control that I'd never experienced before. While I was building a platform to help others, Dad's world was completely falling apart. The arrest and criminal charges had destroyed his reputation in the community, and extended family members were demanding full accountability for years of lies and manipulation. Uncle David called a formal family meeting at his house, requiring Dad to provide complete financial transparency about all his debts, expenses, and fraudulent activities. Dad arrived looking haggard and defeated, carrying boxes of bank statements and financial documents that revealed the scope of his deception. "Robert, we need to understand exactly how much money you've stolen and from whom," Uncle David announced sternly. "No more lies, no more excuses, and no more manipulation." Dad spread the documents across Uncle David's dining room table, his hands shaking as he pointed to various transactions. I borrowed $23,000 from Camille's rental income last year, he began quietly, and another $32,000 this year. Borrowed. Aunt Patricia interrupted sharply. Robert, you stole that money without permission. Stop using euphemisms to minimize your crimes. Dad nodded miserably. I stole $55,000 from the rental income. I also took the $3,200 from Camille's savings account, and I sold her laptop for $800. Emma, who was sitting quietly in the corner, looked up with fresh tears in her eyes. Dad, that's almost $60,000 just from Camille. How much did you steal from other family members? Dad consulted another stack of papers before answering. Various family members sent approximately $18,000 over the past 3 years, specifically for Camille's education and living expenses. I used that money for general household costs and Emma's college expenses. Uncle David's face grew red with anger. Robert, that money was sent based on our belief that Camille needed financial assistance. You essentially defrauded your own family members. I was desperate, Dad protested weakly. Emma's college costs were higher than I expected, and I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing her. So instead, you decided to disappoint everyone else, Aunt Patricia observed coldly. The meeting continued for 3 hours as family members discovered the full extent of Dad's lies and financial crimes. He'd been stealing money, forging documents, and manipulating family members for over 4 years, with the situation escalating dramatically after losing his job. Agnes, Grandma Rose's sister, was particularly devastated when she learned that Dad had sold the laptop containing Rose's final letters to me. Robert, those letters were Rose's last gift to Camille, Agnes said, her voice trembling with emotion. Rose spent weeks writing personal messages that were supposed to comfort Camille during difficult times in her life. I didn't know about any letters, Dad said helplessly. I thought it was just a regular laptop. You didn't know because you didn't bother to ask, Agnes replied sharply. You saw something valuable and sold it without considering the emotional significance to your daughter. Uncle David stood up and addressed the entire family. Based on everything we've learned today, I'm recommending that we completely suspend all financial support for Robert until he makes full restitution to Camille and seeks intensive counseling for his behavior. What about Emma's college expenses? Aunt Patricia asked. She's been victimized by Robert's lies as much as anyone else. Emma spoke up from her corner chair. I got a job at the campus bookstore and I'm working 20 hours a week now. I can pay for my own meal plan and personal expenses. If the family wants to help with tuition, I'd be grateful, but I understand if that's not possible right now. The family voted unanimously to cut off all financial assistance to Dad while establishing a separate education fund for Emma that would be managed by Uncle David to prevent any further manipulation or theft. Dad left the meeting looking completely broken, finally understanding that his favoritism and financial crimes had cost him the respect and support of his entire extended family. 2 days later, the situation got worse when Morrison Industries decided to press criminal charges for the embezzlement. Detective Martinez called to inform me that Dad was facing additional felony counts for stealing $42,000 from his former employer. The company initially hoped to handle the matter privately, Detective Martinez explained, but when they learned about the charges related to your case, they decided that your father represents a pattern of criminal behavior that needs to be addressed through the legal system. Dad's attempts to maintain control over the family narrative completely backfired when local news stations picked up the story about his arrest on multiple felony charges. The coverage included details about the family financial abuse and his theft from both his daughter and his employer. Former co-workers and neighbors began sharing stories about Dad's increasingly erratic behavior over the past year, including his attempts to borrow money from friends and his lies about family emergencies that required immediate financial assistance. Robert had been asking people for loans, claiming that Camille was sick and needed expensive medical treatment. One neighbor told Channel 8 News, "We had no idea that he was actually stealing money from her while using her name to manipulate other people's sympathy." Dad's desperation reached new levels when he attempted to sell family heirlooms and furniture that had belonged to Mom, including her wedding ring and antique china collection. However, estate lawyers quickly intervened, explaining that those items were specifically protected in Mom's will and could not be sold without my permission. When Dad tried to forge paperwork claiming ownership of additional property, Samuel Richardson caught the fraud immediately and filed additional criminal charges. Each desperate attempt to escape his financial crisis only made his legal situation worse and provided more evidence of his pattern of deception and manipulation. By the end of the month, Dad was facing 7 felony charges across 2 different cases, with potential prison time totaling 15 to 20 years if convicted on all counts. His attempts to manipulate and control his family had completely destroyed his life and eliminated any possibility of avoiding serious legal consequences. While Dad's life spiraled out of control, Emma was experiencing a complete personal transformation that surprised everyone who knew her. The shock of learning about Dad's crimes had forced her to confront her own role in the family's toxic dynamics, leading to profound changes in her behavior and priorities. Emma enrolled in counseling at the College Mental Health Center, where she began working with Dr. Rebecca Chen to understand how Dad's favoritism had damaged both her relationship with me and her own sense of self-worth. For years, I defined my value based on how much money Dad spent on me. Emma explained during one of our weekly phone conversations. I thought that expensive gifts and financial support meant that I was loved and successful. Emma also enrolled in a financial literacy course to learn basic money management skills that she'd never been taught. The course covered budgeting, credit scores, student loan management, and healthy financial boundaries, concepts that were completely foreign to her despite being 20 years old. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I didn't even know how to balance a checkbook, Emma confessed. Dad handled all my financial paperwork, so I never learned how to manage money responsibly. Most surprisingly, Emma discovered that she actually enjoyed working at the campus bookstore. She'd never held a job before, assuming that employment would be boring and demeaning compared to her lifestyle as a pampered student. My co-workers are really cool people with interesting stories and goals, Emma told me excitedly. I learned more about real life in 2 weeks at the bookstore than I did in 2 years of college parties. Emma's grades improved dramatically once she started working and managing her own schedule. Without the pressure to maintain a perfect princess image, she felt free to explore subjects that genuinely interested her, rather than choosing classes based on what would impress Dad. I changed my major from communications to social work, Emma announced during one of our conversations. I want to help other families avoid the kind of dysfunction that we experienced. Emma also volunteered to testify honestly during Dad's criminal proceedings, despite knowing that her testimony would likely result in more serious consequences for him. Dad coached me to manipulate family members and take advantage of their generosity. Emma explained to Detective Martinez during her formal interview. He taught me that I deserved special treatment because I was his favorite and that Camille should be grateful to support my lifestyle. Did you understand at the time that your father was stealing money to pay for your expenses? Detective Martinez asked. No, I genuinely believed that Dad was paying for everything with his regular salary, Emma replied. But I should have asked more questions about why Camille never seemed to get the same level of financial support. Emma's testimony provided crucial evidence about Dad's manipulation tactics and helped establish a clear pattern of financial abuse spanning several years. The most significant change in Emma was her commitment to paying me back for the stolen money, even though she wasn't legally responsible for Dad's crimes. She set up a monthly payment plan, sending me $200 from her bookstore earnings every month. I know it will take years to repay everything that Dad stole, Emma said during one of our in-person visits. But I need to do this for my own peace of mind and to show you that I'm serious about changing my behavior. Emma also started attending Al-Anon meetings after realizing that Dad's financial manipulation shared many characteristics with addictive behavior patterns. The support group helped her understand how family systems can enable destructive behavior through denial and misplaced loyalty. I learned that protecting Dad from consequences actually enabled him to continue hurting people, Emma explained after attending meetings for several weeks. By accepting stolen money without asking questions, I was participating in his crimes even if I didn't realize it at the time. 6 months after Dad's arrest, Emma had transformed from an entitled, dependent young woman into a responsible, self-supporting adult who was working toward her degree while contributing meaningfully to her community. I'm actually happier now than I was when Dad was buying me everything I wanted, Emma reflected. Working for my own money and earning things through my own effort feels so much better than being handed gifts that I didn't deserve. Emma's transformation gave me hope that our family could eventually heal from years of manipulation and abuse. She was proving that people could recognize their mistakes, take responsibility for their actions, and make genuine changes in their behavior and values. 8 months after Dad's arrest, his case finally went to trial. The courtroom was packed with family members, journalists, and community members who had followed the story through local news coverage. Dad's lawyer attempted to argue that his crimes were motivated by desperation and mental health issues rather than malicious intent. However, the extensive evidence of systematic theft, forgery, and manipulation made it impossible to present his actions as isolated mistakes. Samuel Richardson presented a devastating case that included bank records, forged documents, witness testimony from family members, and evidence of Dad's attempts to cover up his crimes through additional fraud. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Samuel addressed the court during his opening statement. This case involves a father who systematically stole from his own daughter for years while manipulating family members through lies and emotional manipulation. Samuel displayed charts showing the timeline of Dad's financial crimes, demonstrating how his theft escalated after losing his job and became increasingly sophisticated as he learned to forge documents and manipulate financial institutions. Mr. Martinez didn't just take money from his daughter, Samuel continued. He destroyed family relationships, violated trust, and taught his younger daughter that she was entitled to benefits purchased with stolen funds. Emma's testimony was particularly powerful because she honestly described Dad's manipulation tactics while taking responsibility for her own role in the family dysfunction. My father taught me that Camille owed the family financial support because she was the responsible one, Emma testified. He created a dynamic where I was rewarded for being dependent and irresponsible, while Camille was punished for being independent and hardworking. Uncle David and Aunt Patricia testified about the money they'd sent specifically for my education, which Dad had diverted to pay for Emma's lifestyle expenses. We sent over $6,000 specifically earmarked for Camille's college costs, Uncle David told the jury. Robert assured us that the money was being used appropriately, but we later learned that none of it ever reached Camille. Agnes provided heartbreaking testimony about the laptop sale and the loss of Grandma Rose's final letters to me. Rose spent her final weeks writing personal messages to comfort Camille during future life milestones. Agnes explained through tears. Those letters were meant to provide guidance and support during difficult times. Robert sold them for $800 to buy his other daughter a phone. Dad's own testimony was a disaster. He continued trying to justify his actions and minimize the harm he'd caused, showing no genuine remorse for years of systematic financial abuse. I was trying to keep the family together during a difficult financial period, Dad claimed from the witness stand. Everything I did was motivated by love and concern for my daughter's welfare. Mr. Martinez, the prosecutor, asked pointedly, how does stealing $77,000 from one daughter show love and concern for her welfare? Dad couldn't provide a coherent answer, instead rambling about family obligations and temporary financial hardships that lasted for years. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges related to my case. They also recommended that Dad pay maximum restitution and damages to compensate for the emotional trauma and financial losses he'd caused. Judge Williams addressed Dad directly before announcing the sentence. Mr. Martinez, you violated the most fundamental trust that exists between a parent and child. You systematically stole from your daughter while teaching your other daughter to participate in and benefit from that theft. Judge Williams sentenced Dad to 3 years in prison with the possibility of early release after 18 months if he completed financial counseling and anger management programs. He was also ordered to pay full restitution of $89,000 plus court costs and legal fees. Additionally, Judge Williams continued, the court is issuing a no-contact order preventing you from communicating with Ms. Camille Martinez until you have completed all court-mandated counseling programs and demonstrated genuine rehabilitation. The restitution amount was higher than my original demands because the court included penalties for emotional distress, legal expenses, and the lost rental income that would have been reinvested if I'd had access to my own property. Judge Williams also awarded me sole ownership of the Lake George house, with no restrictions, meaning that Dad could never claim any interest in the property, regardless of his future financial situation. As I left the courthouse that afternoon, I felt a sense of justice and closure that I hadn't expected. The legal system had validated my experience and confirmed that Dad's behavior constituted serious crimes rather than normal family conflicts. For the first time in years, I felt truly protected from Dad's manipulation and abuse. The no-contact order meant that he couldn't pressure me into forgiveness or attempt to restore his control over my financial decisions. 6 months into Dad's incarceration, I received an unexpected letter from him through his court-appointed counselor. The counselor explained that Dad had been participating in intensive therapy programs focused on financial abuse, anger management, and family dynamics. Ms. Martinez, your father has requested permission to write you a letter as part of his rehabilitation program, the counselor explained over the phone. However, due to the no-contact order, I need your permission before delivering any communication from him. I was hesitant to read anything from Dad, worried that it might be another attempt at manipulation. However, my own therapist encouraged me to consider reading the letter as a way to gauge whether Dad was making genuine progress in understanding his behavior. The letter was completely different from any communication I'd ever received from Dad. Instead of excuses and justifications, it contained detailed acknowledgments of specific ways he'd harmed both Emma and me through his favoritism and financial abuse. Dear Camille, the letter began, I am writing to take full responsibility for the crimes I committed against you and the emotional trauma I caused through years of financial manipulation and favoritism. I now understand that my behavior constituted systematic abuse rather than normal family conflicts. I stole your inheritance, violated your trust, and taught Emma to participate in exploiting you for our own benefit. I was terrified of losing Emma's love after your mother died, so I tried to buy her affection with money and gifts. Unfortunately, this meant that I saw you as a resource to be exploited rather than a daughter to be cherished and protected. Your mother tried to warn me about my favoritism before she died, but I dismissed her concerns as jealousy or overprotectiveness. I now realize that she was trying to protect both of you from the destructive patterns that I was creating in our family. Through counseling, I've learned that my behavior was driven by my own insecurities and fears rather than genuine love for Emma. I was using her dependence on me to feel important and needed while punishing you for being strong and independent. I understand that you may never be able to forgive me, and I accept that consequence of my choices. However, I want you to know that I am working every day to become a person who deserves your eventual forgiveness, even if that day never comes. I'm proud of the work you're doing to help other families avoid the dysfunction that I created. Your mother would be incredibly proud of the way you've transformed your painful experience into something that helps other people. Please know that I love you and I am deeply sorry for every way that I failed as your father. Love, Dad. The letter brought me to tears because it represented the first time Dad had ever taken full responsibility for his actions without trying to justify or minimize the harm he'd caused. Emma, who had been visiting Dad regularly in prison, confirmed that his remorse seemed genuine and that he was actively participating in all available counseling programs. "He's a completely different person," Emma told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "He actually listens when I talk about how his favoritism affected both of us instead of getting defensive and making excuses." Emma had continued thriving in her new lifestyle, maintaining her job at the bookstore while excelling in her social work program. She'd also started volunteering at a local nonprofit that helped families affected by financial abuse. "Working with other families has helped me understand how common these patterns are," Emma explained. "Dad wasn't uniquely evil. He was just repeating cycles of manipulation and control that he probably learned from his own childhood." Emma had also started attending family therapy sessions with me, working to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect rather than competition for Dad's approval. "I want us to be real sisters instead of rivals," Emma said during one particularly emotional therapy session. "I want to support your dreams and goals instead of competing with you for attention and resources." Our relationship was slowly healing as we both learned to communicate directly instead of through Dad's filter of favoritism and manipulation. Emma was becoming the sister I'd always hoped she could be, supportive, honest, and genuinely interested in my well-being. Margaret continued providing guidance and support as I navigated the complex emotions involved in potentially reconciling with Dad. She reminded me that forgiveness was a process rather than a single decision, and that I should take as much time as I needed to determine what felt right for my own healing. "Your father may genuinely be changing," Margaret observed, "but you're under no obligation to rush into rebuilding that relationship until you feel confident that he's truly committed to treating you with respect." The blog and speaking engagements had grown into a significant platform that was helping hundreds of families recognize and address financial abuse. I'd connected with legal advocates, financial counselors, and other survivors to create comprehensive resources for people in similar situations. For the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely hopeful about my family's future, while also feeling confident in my own independence and strength. 1 year after Dad's sentencing, my life had been completely transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Using the trust fund money and restitution payments, I'd enrolled in a graduate program in financial counseling with a specialization in family financial abuse recovery. The master's program was incredibly fulfilling because it combined my personal experience with academic knowledge about financial psychology, family systems theory, and legal advocacy. My professors were impressed by the practical insights I brought to classroom discussions, and several encouraged me to consider pursuing research in family financial abuse prevention. "Camille, your perspective as both a survivor and an advocate gives you unique credibility in this field," Dr. Sarah Thompson. My thesis advisor explained during one of our meetings, "You understand the emotional and psychological aspects of financial abuse in ways that purely academic researchers might miss." For my thesis project, I was conducting the first comprehensive study of family financial abuse patterns among young adults using data from my blog and speaking engagements to identify warning signs and effective intervention strategies. The research was revealing fascinating patterns about how financial abusers use guilt, family loyalty, and emotional manipulation to justify their theft. My data showed that financial abuse often escalated during family transitions, like divorce, job loss, or the death of a parent, when power dynamics within the family became unstable. Using the Lake George house that Mom had left me, I'd started a unique program that I was incredibly proud of. The house had been converted into a retreat center called Rose's Haven, in honor of both Mom and Grandma Rose, offering week-long residential programs for young adults who were escaping family financial abuse. The retreat center provided legal consultations, financial planning education, emotional support groups, and practical workshops on topics like apartment hunting, credit repair, and building healthy financial boundaries with family members. "This place literally saved my life," said Jennifer, a 24-year-old woman whose parents had been stealing her salary for 3 years while claiming she owed them for childhood expenses. I thought I was crazy for feeling angry about my family taking my money. The retreat helped me understand that I was being systematically abused. Emma had become my business partner in running the retreat center, using her social work training to facilitate support groups and coordinate with legal advocates. Her personal transformation story was incredibly inspiring to retreat participants who were struggling with guilt about setting boundaries with manipulative family members. Emma's journey from entitled princess to empowered advocate shows people that change is really possible. I told Margaret during one of our regular check-ins. Participants see that someone can recognize their mistakes and build a completely different kind of relationship with family members. The blog had evolved into a comprehensive nonprofit organization called Family Financial Freedom Foundation that provided resources, legal referrals, and support services for people dealing with financial abuse. We'd helped over 2,000 people recognize and escape abusive financial situations within their families. Local colleges had started inviting me to speak during orientation programs to help incoming students recognize warning signs of family financial manipulation. The presentations covered topics like protecting Social Security numbers, understanding the difference between healthy family support and exploitative control, and building emergency plans for students whose families might cut off support as a manipulation tactic. 9 months into Dad's incarceration, he'd completed all required counseling programs and had requested a supervised family meeting to begin making amends for his actions. Emma and I agreed to meet with him at the prison, accompanied by a counselor who specialized in family reconciliation after abuse. Dad looked physically smaller and older than I remembered, but his demeanor was completely different. Instead of the angry, controlling man who had kicked me out on my birthday, he seemed genuinely humble and remorseful. Camille, I want to start by acknowledging that everything I put you through was wrong and inexcusable. Dad said quietly, looking directly at me for the first time in years. I stole your money, violated your trust, and taught Emma to participate in exploiting you. Dad had prepared a detailed written apology that included specific acknowledgments of each way he'd harmed both Emma and me, along with commitments about how he planned to make amends going forward. I've been working with counselors to understand why I created such a toxic family dynamic. Dad continued, I was terrified of being abandoned after your mother died, so I tried to control both of you through money, rather than building genuine relationships based on respect. The meeting lasted 2 hours, during which Dad answered every question Emma and I had about his behavior motivations and plans for rehabilitation. He'd been working in the prison kitchen and saving every penny to contribute toward restitution payments, despite the court-ordered amounts being automatically deducted from any future earnings. I know that forgiveness is something I have to earn through consistent actions over time, Dad said toward the end of the meeting. I'm not asking for immediate reconciliation. I'm just asking for the opportunity to prove that I can be a father who deserves your love and respect. Emma and I left the prison feeling cautiously optimistic about Dad's progress while maintaining realistic expectations about the long process of rebuilding trust and establishing healthy boundaries. 6 months later, Dad was released on parole after serving 18 months of his 3-year sentence. He'd secured employment at a nonprofit organization that helped formerly incarcerated individuals reintegrate into society work that seemed genuinely meaningful to him. Dad had also sold most of his remaining possessions to make accelerated restitution payments, demonstrating his commitment to financial accountability rather than just completing minimum legal requirements. I want to pay you back as quickly as possible so that we can move forward without this debt hanging over our relationship, Dad explained during our first post-release meeting at a neutral location. Emma had graduated with honors from her social work program and was working full-time at the retreat center while maintaining her own apartment and financial independence. She'd learned to have a loving relationship with Dad while maintaining firm boundaries about money and decision-making. I love Dad, but I'll never again accept expensive gifts or financial support that I haven't earned, Emma told me. I've learned that genuine love doesn't require buying people's affection. As I sat in the retreat center office one evening reviewing applications from young adults who wanted to attend our next program, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had led me to this point. Mom's final gift hadn't just been the trust fund money or the Lake George property. It had been the freedom to build authentic relationships based on respect rather than financial control. She'd given me the tools to break the cycle of manipulation and abuse, creating something positive that would help other families avoid the dysfunction we'd experienced. The painful birthday text that had seemed so devastating 2 years earlier had actually been the catalyst for the most empowering and purposeful period of my life. Dad's attempt to exploit and control me had backfired completely, leading to his incarceration, my financial independence, and the creation of resources that were helping thousands of other people. Looking back, I realized that every challenge and betrayal had contributed to my strength, wisdom, and ability to help others facing similar situations. The family financial abuse that could have destroyed my life had instead become the foundation for meaningful work that honored both Mom's memory and Grandma Rose's legacy. Have you or someone you know ever experienced financial manipulation within your family? What warning signs do you think people should watch for to protect themselves from family financial abuse? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and please like this video if my story resonated with you. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and building healthy boundaries, and share this video with anyone who might benefit from learning about financial abuse patterns. Thank you so much for listening to my journey, and remember that you have the strength to break free from toxic family dynamics and build the life you truly deserve. Your healing and happiness matter more than maintaining relationships that require you to sacrifice your well-being.